Let's talk about the Carlos stuff, I guess, because that's the breaking news right now, moving into League of Legends before we get CL on, because probably don't want to go ahead and drag him into the conversation about Carlos. So basically, guys, if you didn't see the announcement, as I speculated on Twitter, there are clauses within the LEC partnership agreement and also probably LCS, LCK, LPL, etc., that basically say if you defame the league, then you can get punished. And so he was engaged in activity detrimental to the best interest of the league and Riot Games in violation of the LEC rules. Consequently, he is suspended from holding any managerial or operational position with a team or organization in a Riot-sanctioned competition or participation until November 13th, 2022. In addition,
that sounded so fire, that sentence, until the last date part of it. It was like, oh my God. And it's like, until next month. Like, all right, mate, okay. Right. Calm down.
Carlos is required to complete sensitivity training and executive training as detailed below as well. So basically, and then I'm going to summarize the rest of it for you. Basically, they retroactively applied this from the date of the tweet, which is also the date that G2 announced that he was taking an 8-week leave. So effectively, they're not actually doing anything. They are simply mirroring the punishment that G2 already placed upon Carlos. And also, he said that he's stepping down and moving away from the company. We don't know if he's giving up his equity. It is implied that he is, in fact, giving up his ownership within the company based on the announcements, but it hasn't exactly been spelled out. And that will probably actually take some time to execute for him to sell any equity back to the company itself or potentially to another investor. Now, why this is a big deal is basically rosters are done by by November. You know, if you're making a League of Legends team, you basically have had to GM your way into success by mid-November in order to make the roster transitions that you need to, because right after Worlds, that's when the kind of player transfer window is open. Obviously, you guys know that in spite of these tampering rules, there are insane conversations that secretly happen all over League of Legends about teams for next year prior to
Riot ends on the 5th of November anyway with Worlds. Yep. So you'd have like, what, 2 weeks or something in that scenario? Like everyone has their lineup by then if you're G2, of course.
Yeah, of course. And so basically the punishment by G2 was a self-imposed punishment that will most likely affect their roster from next year, but it also sounds like Carlos is just stepping away. So this is not really any additional punishment. This is really Riot just saying that they had to do something or make some sort of announcement for PR reasons, because they could have just done nothing and it would have been exactly the same.
I mean, they basically have, like, as you say, what they've done is make this grand statement, like they're doing something big. And then when you actually read all, like I say, when you get to the end of the sentence, it's like, it just undercuts all the fucking emphasis and all the grandeur of what you're saying. Because here's the thing, what I like to imagine is this, Monty. I like to really imagine that Sam Matthews of Fnatic, that's the particular person I'd be thinking of right now, would be reading this statement and he'd just be reading it. What I like to imagine as well is, listen, no offense, but I don't think he's like someone who, you know, scans the whole thing with his peripheral vision, reads really quickly. I imagine he's going, in view of all the above, and he's reading like this, right? And as he gets through, he gets to that sentence and he goes, Carlos Rodriguez is suspended from holding any managerial or operational position within a team or organization in a Riot-sanctioned competition or participation there for 8 weeks. Oh, fuck it. Oh, I'm not going to lie. They had me in the first half. Like, what the fuck? Because here's the thing, that would be his dream. Because remember, when you go and check the date, wait a minute, 8 weeks after September the 8th, like you said, September the 8th. Wait a minute, he gets this off season as well. You mean he can just come back, work all his magic, you know, fucking in the pool, you know, leaving notes under rocks like 80s fucking like Soviet spy movies or whatever he's doing, it's leaving a cipher somewhere. And after all that, magically he gets his team back and then they're like, right, that's it. You've had your warning. Because if you're Sam Matthews, it's like, he can't keep getting away with it. He can't keep getting away with it. Like, he always will, mate. He always will.
Well, it's also like any managerial or operational positions. It's like, of course, he can still like wheel and deal if he's not.
He can tell someone so privately, yeah, of course.
I mean,
informally.
It's so ridiculous.
I know. Because the problem there, if you've thought about it, is look, technically, when you say that publicly, you do mean like, if I ever find evidence you did, then I'll punish you. But as you say, As long as like the top people in G2 don't out him, he could just be doing it all informally over the phone again, leaving notes in the routes.
Also,
like, you can million ways to do it.
Riot would have to want to find him, right? That's the other piece of this. It's like they could just be like turning the other way. I mean, I just don't. I think he's like out anyway, so it doesn't even matter. I think that they're just saying this in the event that for some reason G2 changed their mind or Carlos changes his mind and actually wants to come back and be an active part of this team. But honestly, like if I was Carlos at this point in time, I would just want to sell. He's going to have enough money to live the rest of his life very comfortably if he sells his team. And I would just move on to the next thing if I was him. Use that money to start up a different business, probably not a team, but a different business within the esports space, and use your very large following in order to affect that new business. That's what I would do.
There's a couple of points here, though. So if you go right to the top of the whole thing, by the way, it's so fucking mental that they actually, on a competitive ruling where they're talking about terms, Monty, like extreme misogyny, they would put as the title subheader TLDR. That's mental. That is what a clown show Riot is already. You're putting fucking memes into a thing that you're supposed to be seriously punishing this guy because of the disrepute he's brought LEC and Riot as a company into for his perceived views about women already. Fucking you kidding me? We won't go into that one. You go watch the Four Horsemen episode, you know what I'm talking about. But then there's the way they explain this, right? Here's what's mad. They say he engaged in actively detrimental to the best interest of activity, he engaged in activity detrimental to the best interest of the league and Riot Games in violation of the LEC rules. If you're wondering, by the way, that's because the LEC rules somewhere will contain like all player contracts, something that essentially says like if you bring the league into disrepute or like you associate us with something fucked up. And the whole point of that, by the way, is that is like the most enormous fucking like wide open door that they can walk through essentially on anything. It's purely subjective. Like they could say it on any angle they want. And in this particular case, again, there wouldn't be a set line in the sand. It's more going to be if it's one of those ones you do if push comes to shove. Like what you're waiting for is if something like this blows up and you're like, well, look, he hasn't technically broken any other rules. That's it. He broke the one where it's like he made us look bad because we're associated and he said G2. That's the angle, right? The problem with doing that, though, is this. As usual with Riot, there is no standard. Because here's the issue. I'll just quickly mention one thing very, very, very briefly. So because Carlos did a tweet where he mentioned G2 and said, we are celebrating. He didn't even say Andrew Tate is. He just said we, and there was a whole group of people, including Andrew Tate. Because he did that, the implication is they must, at a minimum, punish him because of that rule, and he must also like receive an actual tangible punishment like suspension, even though, as we've said, it's not really a real thing. The problem with that, Monty, is it then calls the obvious question, which is what was the actual tangible punishment for all the executives at Riot Games for what they did with women over the 10 years and then with the sabotage of the lawsuit? It's just an obvious thing you'd ask because, again, nobody has ever had to bend the knee and have their head lopped off. It's never happened there. And then I'd also say on the similar lines, once you open that door and you set a precedent, I have to ask you questions like this. You know, a couple of years ago, when I showed people, now don't say, guys, like you will now, it's been taken down now, or well, who could know it's on there? On TSM's official YouTube channel, they had a video, which if that's extreme misogyny, would be considered a hate crime in the modern day, what was on this video. That video was up with the guy who owns fucking TSM to this day. And by the way, as far as we know, has never actually received like a hardcore punishment for that ever. It's never even been addressed. That's cool though. That's fine. You know why, guys? Because there wasn't a massive public outrage. So because there wasn't, they're not going to, like you say, they don't really want to punish these people. I always say the main customer of one of these franchise leagues is the person who paid the 10 million euro. Like that's the guy you want to keep happy. So the point is they don't want to punish Reggie. They don't want to punish Jack with the shares thing. They don't want to punish Carlos now. But what they will do is if they feel like it's blown up enough, they'll at least distance themselves. They'll make it seem like, look, even though our own track record shows we don't really give a fuck about this topic, this is the line in the sand. The joke is they're trying to do it themselves. Like nobody will ever be able to police who I have in my franchise leagues. I draw my line here. They're doing the fucking Carlos.
You know, it's also, this goes back to one of the issues with developer run esports, because you mentioned like, yeah, nobody was ever actually punished at Riot for what apparently was such a systemic problem that they had to pay every single woman who ever worked at the company part of this $100 million settlement, which is ridiculous. How could nobody in the executive team be responsible for creating a culture that affected every woman that worked at the company? Like that, I have never seen in my life a scandal like this where no one at least had to take the fall for it. It's unreal. And so, they didn't lose sponsors as a result of that. But as a different example, when a similar scandal hit Blizzard, obviously, they lost all the sponsors for the Overwatch League, right? So the bullshit at the company, at the developer, spills over into esports. And remember that people are paying franchise fees, and the developer is the one selling these sponsorships, and the teams didn't do anything, but now all this revenue is just lost. Like, shouldn't they be fining themselves if they lose sponsorships over this? It sets a very,
and the teams should be asking, like you're saying, the teams themselves should be demanding a response to this.
You should be covering the loss of revenue that you created in the system. But this is another reason why we really don't want developers operating the esports. Not only is it not always an esport, it's more of a marketing exercise, which is also why I like Valorant's partner system, because they finally just admitted that it's a marketing exercise by saying, oh no, we're going to pay you to be partners because we recognize that the teams are adding value, right? You don't pay us. We're going to run this how we want it. It's going to be marketing, but we will pay you a cut of that marketing, right? They're paying them like what, $1.5 million to the teams for the partnership slots. So I like that model a lot better because at least it's honest about what the esport is, and it solves a lot of problems about the majority of Valorant's viewership being done by co-streamers, etc. But in these systems, like, you want the buffer, you want a layer of difference between the developer and the actual esport, because the esport is much smaller than the developer. We're talking about problems with companies that have 10,000 employees or something like that. In the case of Activision Blizzard, that can suddenly, that bad PR can completely decimate the revenue of an esport. And of course, the companies don't care because they realize that the marketing is effective and that they are, in fact, making money off of these esports. Otherwise, they would not continue to run them. But it actually really hurts the players and the teams. That's where it hurts, because all of the marketing money is hidden from the teams. Riot doesn't give.
Yeah, go on.
Riot doesn't give any information about how esports affects skin sales to the teams. They've never received that information. It was pretty wild.
And then also, as I said, not just that video from before, because I noticed I intentionally mentioned something that was still on the channel during the franchising era. That wasn't some shit where it was deleted in 2012 or 2013 and it's ancient history. This was a guy where the joke is, let's be real, if I hadn't mentioned that old ass video from 2012, it would still be there right now. The joke is, I actually blew that way too soon, guys. I should have just kept that motherfucker and just shown screenshots every year, Monty, that's still there, and then I could have just shown they don't give a fuck about any of this stuff. And it's just about when push comes to shove. Because the other thing I was thinking of was this. If you're thinking of figures, what, Reginald the last few years hasn't brought the league into disrepute and made them look stupid and associated them with things they don't want. Of course he has. He's done tons of these ridiculous things. He's made us all look like a fool. How about Lena with that whole shit where she was doing all the poaching stuff and all the stuff with the fucking Lenovo laptop and wrecking Dardock? How would that not apply in this sense? Because I even went back and I looked. And if you go and look on LEC, someone made like a little spreadsheet of all the famous fines that happened in LEC, right? And there's one that a lot of people won't know the story behind because it wasn't made explicit, right? Which was around the time that they had the Origin lineup under the Astralis brand. Well, obviously it wasn't yet called Astralis, it was called Origin that year, remember? And they had Upset and Alfari and those guys, right? There was a story which came out where they fined they initially just said, like, here's what's great, Monty. In the document, it says his name. In the article, because they're scum, it doesn't even say the name. It just sort of says, like, an unnamed figure at Astralis. It just says, like, the general manager of Astralis gets fined €5,000 for behavior, like, unbecoming of a general manager or something. Spoiler, it was the Casper Thid guy, who, if you know, is, like, the sports director or whatever at Astralis and works with the CSGO team and came from, like, handball, some, like, sport that actually isn't just, like, a foul in fucking soccer or what British people think American football should be called. It's actually a real sport. It's one where you just throw the ball in or whatever the fuck. So basically, I'm not talking about COD. Right, basically, this guy did that, think about how mad this is, because here's what I heard happen behind the scenes. What actually happened was they just hadn't paid their fucking players. The same year where they asked players to take pay cuts and told them mad shit like, oh, by the way, if you don't take a pay cut, which I'm asking for right before a playoff match, you know that guy over there in the office, yeah, he just gets fired. Like, doing mad shit where you're pressuring, coercing people like that. And then on top of that, you don't pay them on time the money, which remember, I don't know if to this day you get a stipend or whatever, but remember, in theory, like, that's essential that you pay the people who play in the league. I wasn't expecting to turn up, right? If that isn't worthy of any suspension, that was just a fine. Because remember, here's the thing people don't get in the modern day. The reason why a €5,000 fine's genius is because to you or I, well, not to you or I, we're fucking balling, last V Nation, but to normal people, the peons, us 10 years ago, Monte, to a normal person, 5K is a fucking lot. That's like a few months' salary at least, maybe even 5 months' salary. Also, that could affect like what you're suing up with your life. You might not even have that money now. So that sounds to the fan like, whoa, that's not just a slap on the wrist. That's real punishment. No, when you're an orc like Astralis, you'd rather have the 5K fine than any real punishment.
Oh, yeah.
It'd be way worse if you said this guy couldn't, like for example, in that scenario, by the way, if you don't even pay on time and you're fucking around and messing with the players, I think that probably should be a suspension. That should be like, you should be away from players for a split or something. You have to earn that trust back. So the point is, there is no track record of this with Riot. What they did here, like you're saying, is they saw that it's all blown up. They saw that there was a response from G2, which, by the way, has just taken care of it all for them. There's the real question, Monte. What would they have felt compelled to do if G2 did nothing? If Carlos didn't fall on his sword and basically say, I'll just leave then, or at least intimate that. If he'd have done nothing and they'd held firm and G2 was like, we're still dealing with it, I really wonder, because that's the real question, right? That would have put Riot really to the test.
It literally says in the post that the G2 suspension of Carlos was a mitigating factor. So the fact, if G2 hadn't responded, that's the question, is what would it have been, right? They literally say it's because this has already happened that we are basically just mirroring how G2 punished itself. Very interesting. Very interesting.
To be fair, the mitigating factors for Reginald is he has to live his life as Andy did. And that's a punishment that's cruel and unusual. Exactly. Listen, I think he should get a reprieve from that. He's done his time. He's, can he at least get probation or something?
Yeah, it is actually unimaginably cruel.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.